Good evening, everyone. My name's Tim Pratt. I am the chair of the Environmental Quality Committee here for the City of Shoreview, and we are so glad that you could join us this evening for our first presentation of this year's speaker series. We moved it back a month starting in February this year because we found that January it gets really darn cold and no one wants to go out. So for those of you who are looking for something in January, you didn't miss anything. Today is our first of the series. It's one of our two major projects that we do as the Environmental Quality Committee. The other is the Green Community Awards Program, and that recognizes folks here in the city who do things to protect our waters, to conserve energy, and look for that application on the website coming up probably sometime in March. Applications are typically due around Memorial Day, and really it's, even though we call it awards, it's really more about kind of bragging rights more than it is kind of a competition. So you're not going to get that really excited announcer at if you saw the end of the ski race. Oh, that's right. Oh, like nobody ever saw it on the internet today. I only saw it like 20 times. And gosh, that announcer was excited. Because we want to showcase the wonderful things that people are doing, and we want you to show off and make your neighbors jealous so that they start doing good environmental projects on their properties as well. And speaking of that kind of ties into the city and some of the good environmental stewardship that we're doing as a city. And we'll tie into that. But first, I wanted to kind of tell a little short story that brings us around to tonight's topic. So I'm taking my daughter to piano lessons in another city, and it was after a snowstorm, like a day and a half later, and I'm driving by, and here's a guy going to the end of his driveway where the snowplow had left some stuff, and he's got this thing of salt, and he takes a handful and he throws it into the big pile of snow at the end of his driveway. And I'm thinking, what the heck is this guy doing? Doesn't he know that that's not that's not the way to deal with snow, with salt? And then I thought, well, we told everybody we're going to start using salt because it works better than sand, at least in certain applications. But we didn't tell them salt doesn't work for every winter problem, and it doesn't work for certain things, and we're Americans. We think if a little bit of something is really good, then a lot of something is really good, and that's not the case with salt either. So I'm thinking we need to be telling people things about salt and how to use it and the effects it has on the environment. And so that leads us into tonight's topic, smart salting for safe roadways. And we've got two wonderful folks here from MnDot, and I'm going to read their bios. They're going to trade off in their presentation, and they said they've got lots of information, so I hope that you've got lots of extra room in your brain because there's going to be lots of facts coming in to fill it up. And we will also do some questions afterwards. I'll have the microphone since we are on TV, so if you've got a question when we get to that point, wait for me to get to you with the microphone. So I'll read the bios and we'll get going. Tara Carlson has worked on stormwater and water quality in the Office of Environmental Stewardship at MnDOT for 7 years. Previously, she worked on stormwater and erosion control for Target Corp and as an environmental consultant. She has an MS in Water Resource Science from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And then Bob Vasic, maintenance operations engineer in the Office of Maintenance. He's been with MnDOT for 31 years and has held positions in, okay, well, I don't think we have enough time to read all of those. Let's just say that he's presently serving his second appointment in the CO Office of Maintenance, and that position includes managing the operations unit in the Office of Maintenance, which includes, well, again, that's a whole lot of stuff. Whew. What don't you do? I guess is the question. The position covers a broad range of topics related to field operations and supports district operations staff. Bob holds a BS in civil engineering from the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. So please join me in welcoming Tara and Bob.
Thank you. And thanks to the Environmental Quality Committee for having us come speak tonight. So Salt is in the news a lot lately. You've probably been seeing a lot of news stories about it and some news research coming out. But MnDOT's been thinking about it for a long time, since we started using it, actually. And Bob and I are a good combo to talk about it because he comes from the maintenance side and I come from environmental stewardship office, and I'm happy to partner with maintenance, but they've been doing a great job all by themselves. They have been out there doing the research and, never stopping looking for new ideas on how to do things better. So I'm happy to partner with him. So, there we go. Oh, sorry, just a second. Okay, so I think we have a little bit of switch up in slides, but I wanted to start by asking you how much time you spend in your cars a day. Raise the hands. How many people spend less than 20 minutes in their car or commuting? So that could be transit, less than 20 minutes, that's great. How about 20 to 45 minutes a day that you're in your car or using a bus? Or, okay, how many people over an hour a day? Okay, and you should know that 2016 data coming from our Department of Employment and Economic Development, they found that the Twin Cities ranked number 4 in commuter time, and in a good way, like we were on the low end of commuter times, which is really astounding because we were also the only northern city in that. But that just goes to show you that Minnesotans, and especially in the Twin Cities here, we have it pretty good for as large of a city as we do have, getting around during all seasons, really. But since we are used to those, short commute times or being able to get around without too much trouble, it kind of highlights it in the winter when things do slow down a little bit. And as Minnesotans, we pride ourselves in not letting winter slow us down. We actually like to get out in it, right? So we depend on those roads being open for us, but we have to understand that on the other competing interests we have for that, of those high expectations of keeping our roads clear. And when I was a kid, we used to have snow days. My daughter had her first snow day since she started school this year because things don't shut down anymore. So, with that in mind, we're going to talk tonight a little bit about how public perception and expectations play into how clearing our roads, and then specifically about salt. We're going to talk about how salt works, why we're using it, the problems with salt, and the environment, and especially the increasing attention we're seeing drawn to it as it's found to be building up in the environment. And then we're going to talk more details about the MnDOT's snow and ice maintenance program, both what we're doing today and how we're looking towards the future. So safety, mobility, and environment we're trying to find a balance between these 3 areas. And some other examples of, off the top of your head, how many of you have heard of Towards Zero Deaths? It's another program we have at MnDOT. We've had it since 2003. It was based on a Swedish program, and the idea behind it is to very thoughtfully have an integrated approach to reducing our injuries, crashes, and deaths on the roads. On the mobility side, so that's both our ease of getting around, but also our commerce. And in 2013, the legislature passed legislation for a new program called the Corridors of Commerce. And the aim of that program is to alleviate barriers to commerce in areas where there's maybe bottlenecking or other freight issues. And then on the environment side, we have a number of programs. And I come from the Office of Environmental Stewardship, where we have archaeologists and hydrogeologists and vegetation experts. So all of those resources go into all of our projects and programs. So like I mentioned, if you think over the last 30 years, how good we've gotten at clearing our roads, really, right? How fast the clearing time has gotten. And we don't really think of it too many days of the year anymore. But as you can see, there's some other campaigns going on which are trying to get people to think about, because I think there is true, as the public has seen us clearing the roads with salt, they've started to use it more at home too. And so you'll see some of, I've got actually a example of a poster up here that is, I think the Freshwater Society and MPCA are also trying to get the word out about to not only drive to the conditions, but also dress to the conditions. So to not forget that it is winter and that we need to take care, because we can't expect that every place we go is going to have the sidewalks and the parking lots nicely cleared. But it's also true to drive to the conditions on the roads. Another thing that's kind of interesting when we talk about road maintenance, so I know in Shoreview, you have your beautiful parks. It's amazing, actually, when I drive through here. But you also have a lot of crisscrossing of different jurisdictional roads. So how many of you feel pretty confident you know when you've gone from a municipality road to a county road and then maybe to a state highway? That's good. That's good. I usually don't see that many people confident about it. And I do hear a lot from counties and cities saying, that residents are upset, and it, is an area that's not even one of their roads. So there are programs that serve different purposes. And so at the state level, we are servicing higher speed roads. So you're going to have a different plan for an interstate where you're expecting the traffic to be able to drive speeds of 55 to 70 miles an hour, as opposed to the one in front of your house. And we can't have the same expectations in both of those situations.
Oh, that's my cue. Well, thanks for having me tonight. Again, my name's Bob Vosik, and I work in our Office of Maintenance in St. Paul in our headquarters. And I was going to cover a little bit on organizational structure. MnDot has 8 district offices spread around the state, and a graphic of them on the presentation here. And the district office are the ones that really implement and deliver the products and services that MnDot has responsibility for. They have discretion on how they deliver and manage those products and services. And in the central office, and specialty offices, as we're called, we support the districts and provide guidance and oversight and just support those operations. I did have a handout on frequently asked questions on our snow and ice operations that I sent there, and the link is also to that is on the bottom of this slide. MnDOT's had a kind of a performance target for a number of years, and we call it our bare lane target. And what it is it's snow and ice cleared from the outer edge of the wheel path, and so it's clean in the middle and no more than an inch on the center line, kind of the buildup. So this is a picture of what that looks like. And we did some market research back in the late 90s on what were the public's expectations, what did they want from us, how soon after the end of a snowfall do they expect kind of the roads to be cleared. And it all depended on, was it going to the doctor, was it a weekend, we asked a lot of kind of situational questions to kind of get at the heart of really what the public was looking for. And what we came up with was, again, our bare lane target. It wasn't something that's completely covered, it wasn't something that's completely clear, but really just what we call maybe a reasonable expectation. And then with that, we got into the classifications of roadways. So MnDOT has, these are what we call our maintenance classifications, and we have 5 classifications: super commuter over 30,000, urban commuter 10,000 to 30,000 cars a day, rural commuter 2,000 to 10,000, primary 800 to 2,000, and secondary under 800. And then within that, then we have target regain times for all of those. And so the lower the volume goes, the longer the regain time target is. And these can be challenging at times because, like I said, there's a lot of very high volume roads in the metro area here that MnDOT has jurisdiction over. But then we have a lot in the rural areas. We have more of the lower volume and with longer regain times. And we strive to hit those, but sometimes what happens is we go out and service the road, and we don't necessarily, those are our target, but a lot of times the road will recover a lot quicker than those targets. And so, that gets into what does the public expect. If we perform and do better, we seem to have raised the expectations on what we're providing, and so it's a challenge to deal with that at times. Back to you then, Tara. And if anybody has questions while we go on anything, by all means, ask them. Yeah.
When you first decided to use salt, what was the rationale for doing that?
Well, that predates me by a long time. It actually started in the 50s, and I have a chart further on that really gets into that a little bit, but it's really with the advent of the interstate and some of the higher volume roadways, it really starts fairly low in the 50s, stayed, kind of climbed a little bit up to the 70s, and I don't know if it's just because we had more high volume roads or we stopped using studded tires, those kind of things. There was an increase in the 70s, and then it really was about, we have that public safety and the fleet changes and the cars get faster. It's a lot of conjecture. I mean, all that stuff is happening over a long time, and that's kind of the basic thoughts on it anyway.
What's the definition of regain time and recovery that you were talking about?
Well, regain time is from the end of the storm until we get to that condition clear between the outer edge of the wheel path, and that's the regain time. So it's from the end of the storm until, because the public in general accepts that when it's snowing and you're not always going to have a clear roadway. So that's what that is. I don't know if that answered your question. Yep. Okay. Back to Tara.
Okay, so the mechanics of how salt works. And this is important to understand because for the same reasons that the same reasons that it works so well are also the reasons it's a problem in the environment. So this is a perfect example. We think of it as a melting reaction. We talk about melting the ice, right? But it's not actually, if you think about the cold salt that's thrown out of our trucks or that you throw down on your sidewalk, you're not adding a heat element to it. It's not a heat reaction or a heat transfer. It's actually a chemical reaction that occurs. So when you have your sodium chloride molecule, when it, and I believe I don't have the picture. So when they meet water, the hydrogen bonds in the water create a really strong bond. So they separate, the sodium and the chloride separate to form bonds with water. So as it comes in contact with more and more water, those sodium and chloride ions pull apart and bond with the water, and they find areas of voids within the ice structure, and keep the water ions or the water molecules from bonding and forming the crystal structure. Stepping back just a little bit, it's really important to understand how water freezes. Water seems very common to us, but it's actually a very strange thing from a chemical point of view. Most elements or most molecules, as they go into a solid form, actually become more dense. But water is the opposite. It forms a crystal structure that actually takes up more space, and that's why ice can float on water. If it were any other compound, it would sink to the bottom, right? But it's because it is less dense, it actually floats. So you have this less dense structure that the sodium chloride ions are able to find spaces in, and then as they fill in, they keep the water particles or the water molecules from bonding to each other, and it's this reaction that keeps working until the sodium chloride has basically spent all of its energy. Okay, so the reason that works is because the sodium and the chloride can bond very strongly with water. And in terms, we talk about it lowering the freezing point or being a freeze point suppressant. That's the terminology that we use. But now, as I said, the salt has so much capacity to be able to bond with the water, and then past that point, it's kind of used up its capacity. So when we talk about, well, the more the better, that's definitely not the case. And it's not that at 15 degrees it stops working altogether, but it just is a lot less efficient and it takes a lot longer for it to work.
You hear a lot, I guess, with different ways to approach the application of salt or sodium chloride. Excuse me. And anti-icing is one of those things that MnDOT does, and I know a lot of other agencies do, which is really you're trying to prevent a bond between the pavement and the snow and ice from forming, or you weaken the bond. And the benefit there is that it's easier to remove mechanically then, so you don't have the excuse me, have to put as much effort into removing that and getting rid of that icy surface. It can be very touchy as well, though. That when you use a liquid chloride and you're putting it into snow, it will tend to dilute very fast. So it can give you a window of opportunity early on in a storm to get rid of that snow and ice before it gets compacted, but it isn't always the only thing you have to do. So you can anti-ice to prevent that. MnDOT does a lot of anti-icing for bridge decks to prevent frost formation. So it's one of those things, it's just another one of those things we can do, but we hear a lot lately about just using liquids, and really for MnDOT it's just one of several approaches or strategies that we use. And because it's roughly 23% sodium chloride, there's just less chloride in it. So as a practice for the right type of event, it's a good solution and a good practice. Salt versus sand. I know there's a lot of history with salt versus sand. Again, salt will melt snow and ice when temps are below freezing. And effectiveness, we're saying it's effective for what we're trying to do with it down to about 15 degrees. It'll keep working at lower temps, but it just doesn't work as fast. And so it just loses effectiveness. And it keeps snow workable, so it's easier to remove. Sand, which we have been, MnDOT continues to use, even though we have really scaled back on it, primarily for environmental purposes. It increases traction. We use it in extreme cold for traction, and we use it at intersections, ramps, and if we have some problem areas. This is a chart just showing the historic use, and the data goes back even further to the 50s, but we didn't have both sand and salt on that. It just had salt. It started probably early 50s, and I don't know if you can see it, but the lower graph or lower bar is is salt, and the red or orange one is the sand. And we started scaling back the sand late 90s, early 2000s because of environmental issues. We have a lot of cleanup we have to do, air quality issues with sand particulates in the air. It plugs our storm sewer systems. It can create deltas and wetlands. We have, like I said, do a lot of cleanup under guardrail and sweeping every spring that we were doing quite a bit of. And, you know, we went from the 300,000 tons, now less than 100,000 tons a year. And this goes to 2005, and it's can drop significantly there. But the interesting part is you see the spikes that go, and those are typically, you know, more snow, more events, you'll see an increase in use of both sand and salt. So those are just the bad years are the peaks, and the lows are the more nice years. We're doing a lot of work, you know, looking. There's a lot of information out or interest in organic products. I think Tara was one who told me, well, everything's organic, even sodium chloride is, if you really get down into the science of it. But what we're talking about with this slide is, you know, we see a lot of things like, beet juice and pickle juice and different things like that. So, but the most common ones that we're actually using, and MnDot has an approved products list for various de-icing or alternative de-icers, as we call them, is the most common ones that are out there that are really shown to be effective or are carbohydrates, sugars, beet juice, corn products, and one of the it's interesting. One of the chemists or one of the companies once told me, I said, well, why do you think there's sugar in ice cream? And I said, well, it isn't to make it sweet, it's to keep it from freezing. And so it is they are freeze point depressants, but they're really not effective as a standalone. So there are a lot of times they're used in a blend with other chlorides or another de-icing product. They tend to be a little sticky, which is pretty obvious, and but they're not really effective as a standalone de-icer. Some of the downsides maybe with some organics, if they're not clean, and getting rid of some of the let's say more biodegradable components. You have tracking, and with tracking you have odor. You know, people worry about carpets in their businesses and that sort of thing. And organic products typically also have another side effect is they take oxygen up to degrade. So biological oxygen demand, biochemical demand. Some of the terms BOD and COD are chemical oxygen demand. And so we're cautious about maybe using too much of those, but we're doing some work on looking at some of those as well. So everything isn't always as good as maybe it might be made out to be. So we're just cautious about not getting ourselves into a different situation with organics. Back to Tara.
Okay, here's my drawing. So for the reasons I explained before, the reason that sodium chloride is able to break down the ice structure, then it's dissolved in water. And it's a really strong bond that chloride has with the water. And the only way that you can separate them again are reverse osmosis, which is great in your home. But what about putting it out in a culvert or the end of a pipe that conducts, you know, huge amount of storm water? The amounts of water that we're talking about when we talk about our surface waters are beyond the ability to reverse osmose or to distill. And so that's why from the perspective of maintaining our roads, we have to think about it from a preventative standpoint. And once it's bonded with water, you'll see it's all connected. So whether it's shallow groundwater or going straight to surface waters, it makes its way through. It's either going to go down, infiltrate through the soils to the deeper aquifers, or it's going to make its way in subsurface, eventually out to a surface water. It also will stick behind. So we're still researching and still learning more about how chloride moves through our ecosystems. But we do know that it sticks around a lot. There's not the nice, clean flush that we thought there was. Not that that was a great thing, because was the plan to send it to the Gulf? That's not great for them either. But there has been kind of a denial for a while that that the salt gets washed away, so it's not harming our environment. It's not true. It sticks around a lot. It's a lot more persistent than we once thought. And so in the environment, with chlorides, you'll see, along roadsides, the burn on vegetation. We all have that. Or if you use it at your house, the edge along your sidewalk doesn't look as healthy as it could when spring greens up. And that's it's causing dehydration. Much as if we take in too much salty food, we can feel those same effects. It's the same effect on all living creatures. But when salt gets into surface waters, it can really affect the zooplankton in particular, which are the beginning of the food web for that whole ecosystem. So, and amphibians are especially, all of those aquatic species are really vulnerable as well. And so the toxicity of salt it's more about the buildup. And also it depends on where the creatures live. If we're getting a dense layer at the bottom, then there are those benthic organisms that live at the bottom of the surface waters. They're more at risk too. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing today, what we've been doing, that the public just doesn't know how much is going into it, right? So that's part of, what we want to communicate is that we've been leading these programs for a long time with the idea of, that it's really important to use the right amount, the right material in the right amount in the right place at the right time. And that's been a goal of our maintenance for a long time.
And the map that's shown here doesn't have just a whole lot of significance. It's just really, as far by itself, it's just really to illustrate. We have a lot of different methods that we're using, and for different areas. The northwest part of the state, it gets a lot more extreme cold, or northeast, the northern part, whereas the south we might see more freezing rain events and that sort of thing. So, and different topography. You have a lot more wind in the southwest, so we have a lot more blowing snow issues there, and forested up in the northeast. So, our districts aren't necessarily uniform in all of their equipment and how they're approaching a storm, but the core capabilities are the same. MnDOT has really a lot of some primary things that we're using. Road salt in a granular form. It's our most common de-icing material. We also are using a lot more brine, and that amount that's increasing. I think the last year we were close to 3 million gallons statewide in brine use. And then the additives, and we're using different organic or chemical additives to enhance the salt, either through pre-treating it before it goes out or blending it with brine. And you see a lot of the trucks will have tanks on them, so it's what we would call onboard pre-wetting. So it's putting that liquid on the solid before it goes on the road. And that does basically helps control the bounce and scatter so that material stays where we want it. And it also, that water, adding that water activates it, as Tara was saying. So you actually need liquid water for salt to actually do its de-icing action. So we do a lot of different things. Some of the materials we're using, again, I mentioned sodium chloride. Some what we call alternatives that had traditionally been in the chloride family, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride. They have their own, and we're using corrosion-inhibited versions of those. We require the ones that we purchase to be corrosion-inhibited. Potassium acetate and maybe some of the acetate line are getting a lot more interest lately because they don't have chloride. They potentially can be treated, and they break down relatively quickly in the environment. And we're doing some research on that now. We've traditionally used those for the bridge de-icers, the big automated spray systems in the metro area, up in our District 1 office in Duluth on some of the bridges there. And so we're looking at maybe expanding some of that into maybe more our mobile operations. Cost has been a component there that has kept us out of that. It's acetates and some of the other non-chlorides just tend to be significantly more in price, and solids of those are in the range of, sodium chloride is about $70 a ton. Some of the acetates are in the $2,000 a ton range. So they can be, you don't just jump into that without some significant impacts on your budget. So carbohydrates and sugars. I've been doing a lot of work over time with just as additives to our solids. So we've been doing that. We do have an approved products list, and the web link is there, which has several different categories: additives, magnesium chloride, calcium chloride, and a bunch of those. So we run all those products through a kind of a three-legged process: environmental review for any what I call nasty chemicals in there or residuals in there, field eval, and then our lab will look at it for de-icing capability. We've been doing training for quite a while. We used to call it our Salt Solutions program, and now we've rolled into what we call our road weather technology group or our program. And we do training for operators we call our spot or snow plow operator training. So every MnDOT plow operator goes through that when they first come on. I think, for new hires, and that's done up at Camp Ripley. So we do it every fall, and some key things. So it's just basic truck operation. We do calibration training for all of our sanders. This would different versions that you can do it with something as simple as a bucket at the end of the auger on a truck, and then just understanding what you're using, how the chemicals work, how much to apply, and I'll get into that a little bit more as well. And that's a key thing on calibration. You do it beginning of the year. If the truck goes in for service, you do it again, because that's a key part of really understanding what you are putting on the road. And MnDOT uses controllers that are tied to our tracking system, so we can actually, it measures how much is going out as well. So, but if it's not calibrated right, that is going to give us an error in the calculation. We have a lot of trucks, what I call mobile systems, essentially trucks, and we do all have some of the fixed systems. They might not, some of them are actually roadway. There's some in Duluth on the hills up there, but the ones in the metro are primarily the major bridges, river crossings, 35W over the Mississippi, and some of the other, one by Fort Snelling and some of those. So they have these automated spray systems, and those are running right now a potassium acetate product. And then we do pre-treating and anti-icing with various different equipment. So everything from tankers to a single axle vehicle here with a tank on it. And so you usually see those are actually just streams of material, of brine going out on the roadway in advance of a storm. So we're doing a lot of work with mechanical type things, and sometimes it's efficiency driven, but tow plows are one of them. We have see the one there on the left slide. It's deployed. So if you see something like that, it's not going out of control. That's the way it deploys. It swings out to the side of the truck, and you can actually plow the 2 lanes with one truck instead of just one lane. And that's a chemical hopper on that for chloride. Something somewhat recent is on the bottom portion is what's called an icebreaker, and it's basically carbide fingers on a drum, and you need about 1 inch of ice for that to work without impacting your pavement, but it basically allows you then to break up that ice and remove it mechanically instead of using a chemical. And some of these were deployed, they're strategically deployed around the state, and so if an area gets hit, we can mobilize those to different areas. And our road weather information system, or as we're calling it out, we have a maintenance decision support system, or MDSS, that's been in place for a few years and it's still under development. So we're trying to use technology and information to help our operators make good decisions. Like I said, brine production, this is just an example, some photos of a facility in Rochester. And so they're, basically the brine generation tank is on the bottom in the yellow. Pretty simple. You just run water through sodium chloride rock salt, and it generates the brine, and the control systems will actually, when you get to the right concentration, it stops running the water through and will pipe it off into different tanks. Some of our districts have capability to do custom blends, and the systems are more complex. And Metro has some of the state-of-the-art ones as well. They're usually at strategic locations, and then the brine is shipped around to different places. And talk a little bit, I mentioned the MDSS technology in the trucks. They're getting a lot more complex. As you look at it, there's joysticks and computer screens. And really what we're getting is MnDOT has been involved with technology deployment for about over 15 years. And we started off with road weather information systems, which is just roadside information. What's your pavement temperature? What's the wind doing? More atmospheric. And we started then putting pavement temperature sensors in our trucks, because that's the key for our operators is what's the pavement temp? What is it forecast to do? And now we're getting into what's called maintenance decision support, where that information is fed back to forecaster. They actually give us custom forecasts by route for that operator and send it back to the operator. So the operator, so you have the forecast, but it's now also giving us a recommendation on the application rate. It knows what type of material they have at their disposal, and it uses the information that the driver is sending as far as road conditions and sending it back, giving them a real-time application rate for that storm. So we've been lucky that we've been partnering with Federal Highway Administration on development of a lot of this, so we've been able to maybe get ahead of the rest of maybe other states on this. So and really leveraging that federal money to help us out. AVL is another component of it, automated vehicle location, and that's really so that the supervisor can actually see the truck, can see how much material is putting down. It tells the location, what the vehicle speed is, because when you're applying, you don't want to be going too fast, or that salt just bounces off the road and goes to the edge of the road. So it's both a management tool as well as we can get custom reports out of it, and we can do post-storm reviews and that kind of thing. And tied into some of that is if you go onto our 511 site, we're actually feeding camera views of plow trucks out on the public domain now too. So which are very, they're very popular, but they're only about maybe 25% of the trucks have those in them. So they're not all the trucks. That's back to you, Tara. All right.
Yeah, I think we might be jumping back and forth on these
Oh,
last
okay.
couple slides, so we'll see. Okay, so Bob already spoke to some of the things that we've been doing all along. We're continuing to improve on those, our training and calibration, all the different types of technology. Like I said, they've been doing AVL, the vehicle locators, for a long time. The MDSS is newer, but it's one of those things that there's such a powerful technology that it's getting better and better as we go. We're able to start using some of that data to figure out how we can improve other parts of our program as well. And another thing that's fun to talk about is we also look at the roadway design. So where are the tough spots out there? Where are accidents occurring, or where could they potentially be occurring? And the snow trap identification and reduction program is also really great. I'm going to speak about that in a second. And then I'll talk a little bit about the research going on. So there is a salt sustainability, there's some objectives that we have. We made a commitment to the governor to use our MDSS, and within 5 years, we want to be within 10% of, so it's a decision support system, so we want to be within 10% of the recommendation that's giving our plow drivers within 5 years. It's just one part of it. It's one metric that we're using. We're not basing all of our efforts around that, but it is. Yes, go ahead.
Maybe you could explain what the target means in a little more plain English. I'm not quite sure what.
Okay, so the maintenance, yep, you sure can.
Okay. And what it is there's a governor has issued an executive order on various things for sustainability, whether it's vehicle fleet performance and fuel reduction and a bunch of different things. And for chloride, again, our goal is using the right amount of material, right time, in the right place. And our target, for all these things, is a target. And we're looking at within 5 years, our actual salt usage will be not more than 10% over that MDSS recommendation. And of course, we say adjusted recommendation because the system, is only as good as the information fed into it. So it's being, that's one component. Forecaster, the model for the forecast is evolving, and the recommendation is only looking at the main 24 feet of the roadway, and if you had a 2-lane roadway. It doesn't account for ramps, intersections, and things like that. So we have to adjust that target a little bit for those components that aren't in that recommendation. So.
Tons of salt per season then?
Yeah, it would be individual. It would be based on that roadway. So if the recommendations are for each route. So basically, we have every truck is assigned a route, and so it would be for that route, and for those given series of storms, we're not over that recommendation by not more than 10%. So it's one of those things where setting a flat percentage sounds easy, but when every storm is different and there's no way that you can really just say I want you to reduce X amount. So this was our way of trying to get at taking that into account, as well as using the technology to help us kind of measure where we're at.
Did that answer your question?
It's about avoiding waste over what's recommended for that roadway.
Yeah, and whether it's waste or overuse, and again, we're looking at that environmental as well as the as the cost of that material. So, and that's the sustainability isn't necessarily about cost; it's about environment. So, long term. So,
And the MDSS is kind of complicated, but the idea is it's equipment gathering all that information, pulling it in, and giving the driver and a recommendation of given all of the the pavement temperature, the wind speed, all of these factors. Here's what the computer recommends to put down. So I know it's kind of complex, and we deal with it every day. So it can be hard to remember how to explain it in plain terms. But thank you for that question.
There's a recommendation for each type of route based on all those factors.
Well, more than as they, it can change along the route as well. I mean, that's what the vehicle locator, and I know we're getting a little short on time, so I'm sorry, but so I'm gonna.
Makes perfect sense.
Okay, sure. So, snow tap reduction, we're basically mapping around the state where we're seeing these areas blowing snow. Blowing snow, you don't want to be putting salt down when you have blowing snow conditions, because then you get what's called blow ice. So we basically made the condition worse by putting salt down. So we're mapping where those are, and that's where living snow fences and also structural snow fences come into play. We have great success with that, and we're trying to now figure out where to target that program best, instead of just where do we have a farmer who's willing to join. So where to target those efforts. There's also a lot of research being done by MnDot, but also with locals. So the LRRB, the Local Road Research Board, is a great example. They do a lot of research, and it's Shoreview's participated in this as well, and we're partners on those technical advisory committees. We're a member, but we're also kind of, I guess, considered the host DOT for a Clear Roads group, which is a pooled fund group amongst DOTs around the nation. And so there's a lot of work being done related to snow and ice maintenance and salt through this group as well. And then we are continuing to test new products. And one of the ones that Bob mentioned, that we use potassium acetate on fixed systems on bridges right now, but we're exploring the idea of putting it in trucks up in the Duluth area this season and seeing how that works. And then I want to mention, like at the beginning, how I mentioned jurisdictions. I mean, it's important to understand that there's not going to be one silver bullet as we reduce salt, and a lot of it is the type of roadway, what the best alternatives will be. And so there's a lot of great research being done right here with the Ramsey Washington Watershed District with permeables and permeable pavement, permeable pavers. Those could be great options for certain areas, possibly lower speed roads, parking lots, those kinds of things. So there's going to be a lot of different options depending on the area. And then one thing that I wanted to mention, this is more of an adaptation. So we've started to implement salt tolerant sod, and that is really important because erosion is another thing that you're concerned about. There are chlorides building up, and so we can reduce some of the impact by keeping those roadsides vegetated. So we need to come at it from a lot of different angles. So with that, are there any further questions? I know we're almost out of time here. Yes.
My understanding is that Brownie Lake in Minneapolis is essentially dead because of the salt that's run off of 394 into it. It no longer turns over. The bottom is anaerobic. That's going to continue to happen with more and more lakes. Is the MnDOT doing any research toward ultimately eliminating the use of salt, or do you just think the public will be accepting of dead lakes?
So from my limnology background, I can tell you that Brownie isn't a great example just because it's more of a crevasse. So it actually has been studied for decades, and it hasn't turned over for other reasons not related to the salt. But you are right, it does have there is a saline bottom layer, but it's questionable that the salt had anything to do with that. the concern is real. This concern is real. I don't think brownie is a warning sign because I think it's sort of in its own, it's a anomaly. But if we don't do something, that could be an issue in other lakes as well. And so, like I said, we continue to explore alternatives. The potassium acetate is. We've also done research on other organics. We continue to do that. Now, we need to understand that anything we're putting down on the roadway is going to have some kind of an environmental impact. It's impossible to put, so figuring out those trade-offs is really important. And also what is feasible as a state agency. So yes, we're absolutely, looking into other possible options as we go. And we're teaming together with other DOTs in northern states to do larger scale research like that, so.
So is there research on the percentage of sodium chloride that goes into the watersheds that is retained in them, or that is retained like year over year, and what percentage goes down the Mississippi like eventually?
Well, the study that you hear put out there a lot is from Heinz Steffen back in, I believe, around 2009. And what he found was he came up with sort of a budget that he put together, and he estimated that, I'm trying to recall, so it was in about the 75-25% range. But really what he, unfortunately, he admits too that he wanted to do further research, and he has continued to do research with us on chloride and watershed movement, because it was the percentage put out there, which was they thought that about 70% was staying in the watershed, was sort of a, it was very imprecise study that way. It was budget based on limited input that he was able to get. So we don't, I wish we knew more, but here's the thing, is it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, because as I had mentioned earlier, so the groundwater conditions are very different from watershed to watershed. Some have a lot of subsurface, flow, and others don't have as much. So it depends on the soils, it depends on the topography. It's going to, not to say that it isn't helpful to motivate us, but there's not going to be, I don't think we're going to be able to come to terms with a percentage that's staying here. We do know it's more than we previously thought. And I think that's the most important thing. It's more than we thought. And so it's important to work on.
So I had two sort of unrelated questions. First, where does the salt come from that we get? And the other one is, in other northern states or nations, are there different expectations in a few places about what the snow removal should be and what that means for the removal? So where does the salt come from, and are there different expectations?
Both those.
Can we take a road trip somewhere to,
Yeah, most of the salt, rock salt that gets shipped into Minnesota and the kind of this area is coming from actually they're natural formations. There's a big complex in the Ohio area. Actually, part of the mine actually goes under Lake Ontario, a couple miles, I think. And another source is in Louisiana. And there's a big salt dome down there, a high purity formation. And then we get a little bit from the Kansas area. There's another formation there. There are formations like this all over the world. There's some stuff coming from Peru. We get approached by different companies from Africa. So there's a lot of, these are naturally occurring kind of formations from ancient seas that have dried up, and they tend to, it's kind of a unique thing. So so those are where they come in, and we do just an annual contract with essentially some of the big companies that deal with it, Cargill and Compass Minerals and Morton Salt. So
A lot of it comes up by barge.
Yep. Yeah, a big percentage is by barge, and then on the Great Lakes, ships into the Port of Duluth. So there's ports along the Mississippi and Minnesota River and up in Duluth Superior. So, second part of the question was,
What do other northern states do?
in other countries, you know, there's different, you hear a little bit of, we've had a relationship with a lot of the Scandinavian countries for a number of years, and even through some organizations like called the PRC, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. It's an international group, kind of similar to Clear Roads. Sweden has actually what they call snow roads. So it's made of low volume roads. They actually leave them snow covered all year round. And so they're more rural, low volume roads. So they do some of that. I'm not aware of a lot of other countries that do that. But then other, at least in terms of within the U.S., I think there's an interest in, well, I don't know if anybody leaves them that way. That's the only one I've heard of. I do know that other parts of the countries might tend to use, or around the Great Lakes, you might see some numbers that they use quite a bit more than MnDOT uses, and the state as a whole uses as far as chloride. But those expectations are one of those challenges that we have. We miss an event and we get called on it. And put more down. Well, I would like to say yes, we are, but that's if you look at kind of just raw usage, MnDOT's in about, for just MnDOT, it sounds like a big number, but 250,000 tons a year, in that 200,000 range any given year, and other states are 500,000, 900,000, a million tons. And so but it all depends on what type of system they're taking care of. So other states, they might take care of all the county roads, that kind of thing. So, you can't just, well, I like to say, yeah, I think the state's doing a better job than other states. We've been engaged in it for a long time, but you really have to compare that.
Compare by mileage?
Yeah, you do mileage, and that's kind of where you also need to look at if you have a state that's, gets hit with lake effect snows all the time, that's going to be different. So mileage is one factor, but it's the type of snow and the frequency and water content and everything else that goes with it. Yes?
I heard Colorado was not using salt anymore. Do you know anything about that?
I hear that every once in a while, and then when they say that they weren't using salt, at one point they were using magnesium chloride. So, do you trade one chloride for another? Yeah, it's not rock salt, but it's something else. And so I hear that every once in a while, but then I hear back from them that, oh, yes, they are. Or they're using calcium chloride or magnesium chloride. So, another question?
Just as a ballpark, what would it cost to replace sodium chloride with potassium acetate? And is it even technically plausible? Is there enough acetate out there to replace it with?
Well, and that's one of those, I would call it the supply and demand question. One would be, if you're talking a solid to a solid, I'd say it would be very costly, and I'm not sure if they can produce enough material. But when we're looking at some of the liquid, if we're finding that maybe if we can do effective operations at a third of the quantity of liquid that's recommended by the vendors right now for maybe more of the runway type situation, it starts to get into the realm of cost effectiveness for us, at least comparable to chloride or sodium chloride. But then will the market bear that kind of a volume? And you just look at the raw numbers of rock salt that are used throughout the country. If all of a sudden we just switched one off and tried to go the other way, I'm sure the price would skyrocket until that manufacturing, or because it's a manufactured product, it's not a natural product. So kind of good question, but it's one that we're kind of talking about too. So
So do you have the resources that you need to employ best management practices that you talked about statewide, such as the onboard systems and applicators? We're just wondering, as conscientious citizens who like to write our legislators a lot, to make sure that you have what you need to help reduce
Right now,
salt waste.
I'd say yes, we're doing well with that. I mean, it's always, you know, as you look at new equipment that you need to bring in, we're addressing that. You know, working with trying to leverage some of those federal monies that we can develop systems, and you know, there are always needs. I mean, you could always say I would want more of a lot of things.
Gaping hole keeps you from doing what's the best available.
Not at this point. You know, I wouldn't say there's a gaping hole. You know, we're trying to focus on reducing our chloride use and looking at some of those alternatives. And so, if there was like I said, the silver bullet and it cost X amount, that's when we'd start probably approaching both our management and legislature about those kind of options.
If you're looking for an example of a local lake, besides Brownie Lake, Lake Johanna is the one that's on the worst trajectory locally for its chloride concentrations and probably will not meet freshwater standards before 2050. It's on a much steeper trajectory locally than the other lake. The governor today came out with his document from the 25 by 25 listening sessions, and in it he's got a little chapter about chlorides. And I'm curious whether you're aware whether or not he's come out in support of this bill that's being talked about, sponsored by the Minnesota Nursery and Landscape Association, that's going to try to get private applicators to catch up with what the public applicators are doing to reduce. At this point, my perspective is the public entities, cities and MnDOT, are doing pretty good in reducing significantly, but the private sector applicators almost cannot because of lawsuit threats. Do you know if he's going to take a position on that bill?
I'm sorry, what was that last part? Do you want to know if he's going to take a position? Yeah, so this legislation was first enacted in New Hampshire, and there's been a lot of talk about it for several years already, and I know there's been a couple of attempts to get a bill in the legislature. This is targeting private contractors who tend to be landscapers, you know, in the growing season, and then converting to clearing parking lots and sidewalks in the wintertime. And you're right that our public works entities, they are extremely trained, you know, well trained, and a lot of them, most of them that I'm aware of, have actually been taking the certification classes for you know, good management of salt already. So I think it's a great step to bring the private sector up, you know, trying to bring them up to the same standard. And the liability is definitely one thing that's holding them back. The other piece of it will be that there needs to be a value put on it, kind of the same way that there has been with you know, landscapers who have gone organic, for people to start hiring contractors who get that certification. I think that would be great if that's seen as a valuable thing aside from the liability. So yeah, I mean, since it's private contractors, MnDOT's not, we're not working on that bill, but I personally, I think it's great. It's moving forward.
Maybe address that a little bit too?
Yeah.
And then, just so I'm sure what you're talking about, I know that we've had conversations with MPCA and Environmental Quality Board, those type of groups, about the issue with what they would call over-application by private applicators, and feeling that some of that is driven by their liability. Whoever hires them passes the liability for slip and falls onto the contractor, and so that they don't have that concern. So, and they don't have the protection that, say, MnDOT has under statute for some protection for snow and ice operations. So I think what's been proposed in the past is legislation protecting them from that liability if they get certified as an essentially going through a training program sponsored by MPCA for those operators. So if that's kind of what you're talking about. And so, you know, that's part of the whole training package. We've been doing similar things for a number of years, although we don't have, the state DOT doesn't have that liability issue that a private applicator does. So that's one of the mechanisms that they're looking at. New Hampshire actually has had passed legislation like that to help those kind of move the bar on some of those private applications. So I think it's a good step. It's just one strategy out of many, so.
Okay. Well, Tara and Bob, I want to thank you. We've got a couple of cutting boards here. They're from wood from the hood. These are downed trees that have been, the wood has been harvested and cutting board. We only have one card, so you'll have to share that, but we've got a cutting board for
thank you.
each of you. If you'd all join me in thanking Bob and Tara for their presentation.
Thank you.
And just a note, next month, you know, it's the third Wednesday of the month through May, and next month's presentation is on public health and climate change. So please join us then. Thank you.